The end of everything. The city skyline stretched endlessly beyond the glass windows of their Manhattan penthouse, the golden hues of sunset casting long shadows across the room. Emily Montgomery stood at the edge of it all, her arms crossed tightly around herself, as if bracing against the invisible storm that had already begun tearing her life apart. She had lived in this home for 30 years. 30 years of marriage. 30 years of sacrifice. 30 years of believing in the man sitting just a few feet away from her. But tonight, for the first time, she felt like a stranger in her own house. William Montgomery, her husband, the man she had built an empire beside, the man she had supported through every triumph and failure, sat in his leather chair by the fireplace, swirling a glass of whiskey in his hand. His focus wasn't on her. It hadn't been for months. Emily swallowed, forcing her voice to remain steady. "William, we need to talk." A sigh. Slow, drawn out, heavy with impatience. He didn't even look at her, his eyes still fixed on his phone. "About what?" he asked flatly. She had rehearsed this conversation over and over again in her mind, but now, standing here, the words felt tangled in her throat. "About us," she finally said. "About how things have changed." That got his attention. He let out a scoff, setting down his drink with deliberate slowness. His eyes, once warm and full of life, now held nothing but cool detachment. "Changed," he repeated. "Emily, let's not pretend. Things haven't changed. They've ended." Her stomach clenched. Ended. For a long moment, she could only stare at him. This was her husband, the man who had once whispered late-night dreams into her ear, who had held her hand in sickness and in health, who had promised forever. And yet, he was speaking as if those years meant nothing. Emily took a shaky breath. "I don't understand." William stood, adjusting the cuffs of his expensive suit as if he were preparing for a business meeting rather than dismantling their entire marriage. "I want a divorce." The words hit her like a slap, leaving her breathless. She let out a short, disbelieving laugh. "You can't be serious." His gaze remained impassive, his posture rigid with certainty. "Oh, I'm very serious, Emily." Her heart pounded in her chest. "Divorce? After everything?" She shook her head. "This is just a rough patch. We can fix this. We always do." William exhaled sharply, rolling his eyes. "Stop being naive." Her breath hitched. She had stood by his side through everything, through late nights waiting up for him, through the stress of building his company from the ground up, through the years when money was tight and success felt impossible. She had been his partner, his rock, his best friend. And now, just like that, he was throwing her away. She searched his face, desperate for a trace of the man she once knew. "You made a vow to me," she whispered. "We built a life together, a family. And now you want to throw it all away." William's expression remained cold. "It's already over, Emily. You just refuse to see it." Her hands trembled at her sides. "Why?" And then the final blow. A slow, amused smirk crossed his lips. "Because I deserve something better." Her breath caught. Better. The word echoed in her mind, slicing through her like a dagger. William studied her for a moment, as if enjoying her stunned silence. Then, casually, he delivered the final insult. "Jessica is better." Jessica. Emily's blood turned cold. She had suspected there was someone else, had felt the shift in his behavior, but hearing it confirmed. Hearing the certainty in his voice. Was unbearable. Her voice was barely a whisper. "You're leaving me for someone else." William shrugged, unfazed. "She's young, beautiful, exciting." His gaze swept over her then, full of distaste. "She reminds me of the woman you used to be." Emily recoiled as if he had struck her. She opened her mouth to respond, to fight back. But he wasn't finished. "You've changed, Emily," he continued, his voice laced with cruel amusement. "You let yourself go. You're not the woman I married." A pause. Then, The words that would haunt her forever. "You look like a whale." Silence. A silence so thick, so deafening, it swallowed her whole. She felt numb, completely and utterly numb. This was the man she had loved, the man she had devoted her life to. And he was speaking to her as if she were nothing. William took another sip of his whiskey, completely unmoved. "Come on, Emily, don't look so surprised. You had to know this was coming." Her hands clenched into fists. Her entire body shook with rage, with heartbreak, with an agony so deep it was almost unbearable. But she refused to let him see her break. She forced herself to stand taller, to meet his gaze without wavering. "You disgust me." He chuckled, completely unbothered. "That's fine, but you'll be out of this house by tomorrow." She blinked. "Tomorrow." William gave a slow nod. "You heard me. Take whatever you want. Not that it matters. I've already updated the bank accounts." Her stomach twisted. "You cut me off." "Of course," he said smoothly. "Jessica and I are starting a new life, and I don't intend to finance your putty party." Anger surged through her veins, white-hot and blinding. "This is my home, William." He tilted his glass toward her in mockery. "Not anymore." She stared at him, searching for even a flicker of remorse, of hesitation. There was nothing. Finally, Emily took a deep, shaky breath. "You'll regret this." William smirked. Doubtful. She turned on her heel, her heart pounding as she walked toward the door. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing her fall apart. As she stepped into the hallway, Jessica's laughter echoed from another room. Light. Playful. Victorious. Emily didn't stop. She didn't turn back. With one final breath, she opened the front door and walked out. The night air was cold against her flushed cheeks, the city buzzing around her as if nothing had changed. But for her, everything had. She had just lost everything. Or so she thought. Because one day, William Montgomery would regret every word he said. And Emily would rise from the ashes. A fall from grace and the first steps to redemption. The cold air hit Emily Montgomery's face as she stepped out onto the streets of Manhattan, but she barely felt it. Her heart was pounding, her mind racing, and yet she had no destination. No home, no plan, no one waiting for her. Just hours ago, she had been the wife of a wealthy, powerful man. She had spent 3 decades crafting a life within the walls of their penthouse, believing it was hers. But now she was just another woman walking the streets, invisible to the world, with nothing but the weight of betrayal sitting heavy in her chest. She clutched her coat tighter around herself, her breath shaky as she forced herself to move forward. But where could she go? Her first thought was Lisa. Lisa had been her closest friend, before William. Before the slow isolation that had crept into her marriage, pulling her away from everyone who had once cared about her. Lisa had warned her about William, had seen the signs before she did. And what had Emily done? She had chosen him. Again and again. She had convinced herself that Lisa was overreacting, that William still loved her, that she just had to be patient. Now, standing on the sidewalk with nowhere to go, she realized Lisa had been right all along. With trembling hands, she pulled out her phone and dialed. It rang 3 times. And then, a hesitant voice answered. "Emily?" Emily swallowed hard. "Lisa, I." Her voice cracked. She cleared her throat, trying to steady herself. "I need somewhere to stay, just for tonight. I don't know what to do." A silence stretched over the line, heavy with history, with old wounds and unspoken words. Then Lisa sighed. "Emily, I don't know if that's a good idea." A sharp pain twisted in Emily's chest. "What? Why?" Lisa hesitated. "It's not that I don't care, but it's been years. The last time I tried to talk to you about William, you pushed me away. You chose him over me, over all of us." Emily's throat tightened. "I know," she whispered. "I was wrong. I see that now. But please, Lisa, I have no one else. Another long pause. Then, softer this time. I hope you figure things out, Emily. And just like that, the call ended. Emily stared at her screen, disbelief washing over her. She tried another number, then another. Every call was met with the same polite rejection, the same forced excuses. The women she used to call friends had long moved on. She had no one left. A gust of wind sent a shiver down her spine, and for the first time, she truly felt alone. From wealth to nothing. With no other choice, Emily wandered. The city moved around her, fast and indifferent. Men in suits rushed past with their morning coffees. Women clicked down the pavement in high heels. Taxis honked impatiently. It was strange, she thought. How quickly life continued. How her entire world had collapsed, and yet nothing around her had changed. Eventually, exhaustion took over. She hadn't slept, hadn't eaten. Her feet carried her toward a small cafe, its warm glow spilling onto the sidewalk. Without thinking, she stepped inside, letting the warmth wrap around her. She ordered the cheapest coffee on the menu and settled into a small corner table by the window, staring out at a city that no longer felt like home. The cup was warm in her hands, but it did little to comfort her. She was homeless, penniless, abandoned. A few months ago, she had been planning a lavish anniversary party. Now she was wondering where she would sleep tonight. The weight of it all pressed against her chest, suffocating her. How had she let this happen? How had she spent so many years believing in a man who never truly loved her? She glanced down at her reflection in the coffee surface. William's words echoed in her mind. You let yourself go. Was that how he had seen her? Not as a wife, not as a partner, but as something to be discarded when she no longer fit his definition of perfection. Emily clenched her fists. No, she had given him everything. And now she had nothing. But she refused to stay that way. The beginning of something new. By the time the sun began to rise, Emily had made a decision. She couldn't go back. She wouldn't beg William for help. She needed to start over. Her only problem. She had no idea how. As the cafe emptied, she noticed an elderly woman at the counter, struggling with a tray of cups. Instinctively, Emily stood and rushed to help. Here, let me. The woman smiled gratefully. Thank you, dear. Emily helped carry the tray to a nearby table. It wasn't much, but for the first time since last night, she felt useful. As she turned back to her seat, the cafe owner, a kind-faced man in his late 50s, watched her curiously. You've got good instincts, he said. Emily hesitated. I used to manage events, she admitted. I know how to keep things moving. The owner raised an eyebrow. You looking for work? She blinked. Work? She had never considered it. She had never needed to. But now she needed everything. Yes, she said before she could overthink it. I am. The owner studied her for a moment, then nodded. Come in tomorrow. I'll see what I can do. It wasn't much. It wasn't anything like the life she had before. But it was a start. And for the first time since she had walked out of that penthouse, Emily felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Meanwhile, William Montgomery sipped his whiskey, staring out at the city skyline. Jessica was already asleep in the bedroom, oblivious to the restless thoughts plaguing him. He had gotten everything he wanted. A younger, beautiful woman. A fresh start. So why did it feel empty? For the first time, a flicker of something unsettling crept into his mind. What if he had made a mistake? He shook the thought away. Emily was gone. That chapter was over. And yet, as he stared into the night, he couldn't shake the feeling that fate had other plans. When the tables turned, the scent of fresh coffee filled the air as Emily wiped down the last table in the small cafe. It had been 3 weeks since she started working here. 3 weeks since her world had collapsed, and she had been forced to build herself from the ground up. It wasn't easy. Going from a luxurious Manhattan penthouse to living in a tiny rented room above a laundromat was something she never imagined she'd experience. The first few nights had been the hardest, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep, wondering how everything had unraveled so fast. But slowly, things started to change. For the first time in years, she was working. Not for a husband who took her for granted. Not for a marriage that drained her soul, but for herself. She was exhausted, sure. Her feet ached after long shifts, and her hands were no longer as soft as they used to be. But every single dollar she earned, every tip she put in her pocket, felt like a victory. Because for the first time in her life, Emily Montgomery was free. The woman in the mirror. She stood in front of her small bathroom mirror one evening, examining herself under the dim light. The woman staring back at her wasn't the same one who had walked out of that penthouse in tears. Her face was slimmer, her body stronger. The stress weight that had clung to her for years was melting away, not because she was starving or punishing herself, but because she was moving. She was walking everywhere, carrying trays, lifting boxes, cleaning tables. She wasn't drowning in self-pity anymore. She was fighting. And it showed. For years, she had allowed herself to become invisible in her own marriage. She had believed William's cruel words, had let them define her. But not anymore. That woman was gone. In her place stood someone new. Meanwhile, in a penthouse not so happy anymore, William Montgomery sat at the dinner table, the sound of Jessica's voice droning on in the background. He wasn't listening. 3 months ago, he thought he had everything he wanted. A young, beautiful woman who adored him. But as the weeks passed, the cracks began to show. Jessica wasn't Emily. She didn't wake up early to make sure his breakfast was ready. She didn't remember how he liked his coffee. She didn't listen when he talked about his day. And worst of all, she didn't care. The novelty had worn off, and now he was just a paycheck to her. He could feel it in the way she spoke to him, in the way she never looked up from her phone when he entered her room. For the first time, William felt something he never expected. Regret. And that regret grew tenfold when he received a call from an old friend. "You won't believe who I ran into today," the voice on the other end said. William raised an eyebrow. "Who?" "Emily. I barely recognized her. She looks incredible." William sat up straighter. "What do you mean?" The man chuckled. "She's changed, William. She's not the same woman you left." Something cold settled in William's stomach. He had always assumed that Emily would fall apart without him. That she would beg, that she would wither away, that she would never recover. But now she was thriving. And for the first time, William Montgomery realized he had made a terrible mistake. The first encounter. A few days later, William saw her with his own eyes. It was a Saturday evening, and he was meeting a business associate at a new restaurant when he froze in place. There she was, Emily. She was sitting at a corner table, laughing. A genuine, radiant laugh that he hadn't heard in years. And she looked breathtaking. She had lost weight, yes, but it wasn't just that. She carried herself differently. There was a confidence in her posture, a light in her eyes that he hadn't seen since their early years together. She was wearing a simple, elegant black dress, one that hugged her body in a way that made him remember things he shouldn't. She wasn't his Emily anymore. She was someone better. And sitting across from her was another man. A tall, distinguished-looking gentleman, smiling at her like she was the most captivating woman in the world. William's jaw clenched. For the first time, he felt something he had never thought possible. Jealousy. Regret hits like a storm. William didn't realize he had been staring until his business associate nudged him. Something wrong. He quickly composed himself. No, nothing. But inside, it was far from nothing. That was supposed to be him sitting across from Emily, not some stranger. That was supposed to be his wife. But he had thrown her away. And now, she had moved on. That night, William couldn't sleep. He tossed and turned, images of Emily flashing in his mind. The way she laughed, the way she looked, the way she had completely forgotten about him. Jessica was asleep beside him, unaware of the war raging in his mind. And as William lay awake in the dark, staring at the ceiling, he realized he had lost the best thing that had ever happened to him, and he would never get her back. The final chapter of regret, the soft hum of conversation, and the gentle clinking of glasses filled the restaurant. But for William Montgomery, the world had gone completely silent. All he could hear was the echo of Emily's laughter, a sound he hadn't realized he missed until now. She was radiant. She looked alive, happy, unbothered. And worst of all, she didn't even notice him. The woman he had once called his wife, the woman he had humiliated, discarded like an old business deal, was sitting across from another man. A man who looked at her the way he should have. The weight of his mistake came crashing down on him all at once. He had left Emily believing that she would never recover, that she would fall apart without him. But the truth, he was the one who fell apart. She had rebuilt herself. She had become stronger. And he had lost everything. The breaking point. For the first time in months, William did something completely out of character. He walked away from his dinner meeting. He didn't care about his business associate. He didn't care about Jessica, who was probably sitting at home, scrolling through her phone, completely unaware of his absence. He needed to talk to Emily. He needed her to see him. He needed her to remember. William weaved through the restaurant, his heart pounding harder with every step. And then, he was there, standing beside her table. Emily looked up. And in that moment he knew. He was nothing to her anymore. Her expression remained calm, almost indifferent. That hurt more than anything. "Emily," he said, forcing a small smile. "It's been a while." The man sitting across from her, her date, looked between them, sensing the tension. Emily, however, remained composed. "It has," she replied simply, taking a sip of her wine. Her tone was polite, distant, unaffected. William swallowed. "You look great." She smiled, but it wasn't for him. I know. He wasn't sure what he had expected. Maybe anger, maybe sadness, maybe some sign that she still felt something for him. But there was nothing. The Emily he had once controlled, once belittled, once abandoned, was gone. And this new Emily, she didn't need him. She never had. A desperate attempt. William cleared his throat, shifting uncomfortably under her unreadable gaze. "Can we talk?" Emily exchanged a glance with her date before setting down her glass. "William, I don't know what there is to say." He panicked. For the first time in his life, the words wouldn't come. He had spent years controlling every situation, every outcome. He had always known what to say, how to manipulate, how to get what he wanted. But not now. Not with her. Because this wasn't his game anymore. And the realization hit him like a tidal wave. He had already lost. Still, he tried. "I was wrong." His voice was quieter now. "I made a mistake." Emily tilted her head slightly, considering his words. "Yes," she said. "You did." Silence stretched between them, thick and final. William had one last chance. He could beg, ask her for another chance, tell her how miserable he had been, how Jessica could never replace her. But he knew, deep down, that it wouldn't matter, because Emily had already moved on. And that was the real punishment, the knowledge that she had healed, that she had grown without him, that she had become happier without him. So, for the first time in his life, William Montgomery accepted defeat. "Goodbye, Emily," he whispered. And for the first time since they had parted ways, he finally walked away. Not as a man who had left his wife for someone younger. Not as a man who thought he had won. But as a man who had lost everything. Emily's final victory. As William disappeared from sight, Emily let out a slow breath. Her date studied her carefully. "Are you okay?" She smiled, genuinely. I am. And she meant it. For years, she had been trapped in a cage of expectations, of self-doubt, of a marriage that had drained her. But now she was free. And there was nothing more beautiful than that. This concludes the story. Thank you for watching until the end. I hope you found it enjoyable. If you did, please consider liking the video and sharing it with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and activate the notification bell for more captivating stories. Have a great day.